Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, almost like Shantiniketan in many respects. And as I was walking in, I was being told about the very interesting background of the original owner of this building, who apparently was a very important political and historic figure in the early 50s. Most books I tend to find are based on oral recollections or on memory, which is notoriously fickle or notoriously unreliable. A lot of such books are score settling or trying to show that the author, without the author, nothing would have happened. Everything is backed by some written record or written documentation because of the protests against the implementation of the Mandal Commission in North India. You had the repatriation of Indians working in the Middle East. And the net consequences of these events really, and then of course you had the hardening of interest rates in international markets, where India had resorted to short-term borrowings in the late 1980s to take advantage of the softness in international financial markets. But because of what happened internationally and more importantly what happened domestically, these interest rates increased and the cost of repayment went up. The net consequences of all these events was that when the government came to power on the 21st of June 1991, India had less than a week of foreign exchange reserves. India faced the prospect of a default on her international obligations, and the government really had a first-rate financial crisis on its hands. So this book really describes not so much the background to the crisis, but the response to the crisis. It discusses the background to the crisis, why the crisis took place, but it really is a response, is more a discussion on the response to the crisis. And the main actors, the main heroes in this book is this most unusual jugalbandi of Mr. Narasimha Rao, who was the Prime Minister, and Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was the Finance Minister. Now, both Mr. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh were pillars of the ancient establishment. They were the pillars of the very establishment that had in many ways presided over events that caused the crisis of 1991. So, and you had this unusual pair, and there were many similarities between the two. Both were very serious, poker-faced individuals. Both were known for being left of center. Both were known for not being terribly decisive when it came to events. And I have recounted how Dr. Manmohan Singh became Finance Minister, the circumstances that led to his appointment as Finance Minister on the 21st of June, and I have also recounted the events that led to the appointment of Mr. Narasimha Rao as Prime Minister. He took over on the 21st of June 1991. Now, between the 21st of June 1991 and the 24th of July 1991, 33 days. Now, these were 33 days that changed the face of India. It's remarkable. You look back on it, in 33 days, a minority government, remember Mr. Narasimha Rao didn't have the majority in the Lok Sabha. He ran a minority government. A minority government in 33 days was able to push through what amounted to not tinkering, but a fundamental re-architecturing of India's economic policy. And there were three pillars of this re-architecturing. The first was a new industrial policy. The second was a new trade policy. And the third was a new fiscal policy. A new industrial policy to unleash entrepreneurship and to remove controls and regulations. A new trade policy in order to push exports and make imports easily available to exporters particularly. And a new fiscal policy in order to reorient government expenditure away from subsidies and consumption and more to investment. So these were the three pillars. Now, what could Mr. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh have done on the 21st of June 1991? They had basically four options available to them. The first option was a default option. Now, the default option has very sound psychological principles associated with it, which is that if you owe somebody $5,000, you should be worried. If you owe somebody $5 billion, he should be worried. So the general principle of default is that since countries owe billions of dollars, they just get up and say, we're not repaying, do what you want. It's not the country that suffers, it also are the lenders who end up taking what in the language of financial economics is called a haircut. But both Mr. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh were very clear from day one that India's credibility is at stake. India may not have borrowed extensively in the past, but whatever we have borrowed, we have repaid on time. So we are prudent. Like many of us in our daily lives, when we borrow, we tend to repay on time. The same psychology applied at the level of the country. So the default option, while it had many adherents, particularly those belonging to the left parties, was discarded by these two gentlemen. The second option was the NRI option. Now the NRI option again is a very attractive option. You have 20 million Indians living outside India. Why can't we appeal to their sense of patriotism and they will give us $4 or $5 billion which was required for us to tide over the immediate crisis, and then we will buy some time. Now the problem with the NRI option was that NRIs were taking money out. From September of 1990, NRIs were taking money out. Almost $100 to $150 million a month were going out because of the lack of confidence of the NRIs in India's politics and India's economics. So at a time when the NRI confidence in India was at an all-time low, how could a minority prime minister and a minority government finance minister carry conviction with the NRIs? So the NRI option was also ruled out. The third option was the gold option. Now this is a very attractive option. In fact, there's a chapter in my book which discusses the gold option. And the biggest proponent of the gold option was Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And the gold option again is again apparent, obvious to all of us. India has a voracious appetite for gold. We are the world's largest hoarders of gold in some form or the other. And the theory goes that if we appeal to the sense of patriotism and altruism of Indian housewives, we can get the gold out and we can then mortgage the gold, borrow against the gold, overcome our crisis, and we are home free. The problem again with this option was that the gold option had been tried out in the past, not terribly successful, and in any case, it takes a lot of time for people to develop the confidence in the government for them to give up on gold, which other than land is the only form of social security for most Indian homes. And remember, we were facing a crisis not of weeks or of months, but of days. So we needed something that could transform the situation in a matter of days. So the default option was ruled out, the NRI option was unrealistic, the gold option was unworkable, and therefore we had the fourth and the only option available to us, which was to go to the international financial institutions. So we went to the IMF, and the IMF said, well, we'll be glad to bail you out, but we want you to do certain things which you yourself want to do, but you have not been able to do for a variety of reasons. And if you basically follow this agenda, which was well known by then, you can be assured of our support. And to cut a long story short, that is what really happened in 1991. So the point I want to make is that in 91, Mr. Narasimha Rao came to reforms out of compulsion. Dr. Manmohan Singh was more of conviction, less of compulsion. But whatever it is, as events unfolded and as success accumulated, compulsion gave way to confidence. Compulsion gave way to conviction. And soon, both gentlemen, both the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, began to talk as if they had invented economic reforms in the first place. So the new fiscal policy, the new trade policy, and the new industrial policy. This was all in a matter of 33 days, which was accompanied by traumatic events of devaluation not once, but twice, again which I have described in the book. Gold sales not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times. And great political opposition from the left, from the BJP, and from within the Congress party. So this book really is a description of how the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister navigated these political difficulties and ushered in this fundamental transformation in the economy. Now I want to read only 2 or 3 paragraphs which sums up in many ways what was happening in that time. This is a chapter called The Sanskritist Prime Minister. And I want to read from this chapter because it's very relevant nowadays. On 15th of July 1991, the motion of confidence, moved 3 days earlier, came up for voting in the Lok Sabha. But before the actual vote, the House was treated to a vintage Narasimha Rao performance. It was his first major speech in the Lok Sabha as Prime Minister. He had been given briefs on different subjects, but he decided, as always, to speak not from his text, but extempore. That day, the Prime Minister was at his philosophical best. At times, what he said appeared convoluted, but that was par for the course. He defended what the government had done since it had taken over. He was not partisan, but made the point effectively that the situation he had inherited had left his finance minister and him with no other option but to embark on a series of tough measures: gold sales, devaluation, talks with the IMF, and trade reforms, with industrial liberalization also imminent. The highlight of Rao's 45-minute intervention came when he lapsed into Sanskrit. "What have I done?" said Mr. Narasimha Rao. "What have I done? What had the government done? We know that there are no alternatives on what we have done. We have only salvaged the prestige of the country. Sarvanashe samutpanne ardham tyajati panditaha. Sarvanashe samutpanne ardham tyajati panditaha. This is precisely what we have done. I do not say that the economy has been booming or is going to boom immediately. What I am saying is, Sarvanashe Samutpanne. I could see, this is my paragraph, I could see that most people in the Lok Sabha could not understand what the Prime Minister was saying. I recall A.N. Verma, his principal secretary, looking at me with a bemused expression and asking me, Kaho Pandit, kuch samjhe kya? Tell me, did you ever comprehend what he said? I then told Verma that the Sanskrit saying in the Prime Minister's speech meant that the wise man, in the event of total ruin, wriggles out by giving up half his possessions, ardham tyajati panditah, in the hope that he will save himself from total destruction by using what he has left properly. Even if Rao's expression made little sense to those present, he definitely appeared Upanishadic. Moreover, he had unknowingly served notice to the BJP. Sanskrit was not its monopoly. The Prime Minister was not yet done. He lapsed into Sanskrit once again. And he went on to say, and this is the Prime Minister speaking, naturally, there is a long distance to go. This is not all. This is only the beginning. This is not the final solution. If you do not have a beginning, and this is typical Mr. Narasimha Rao, if you do not have a beginning, you do not have an end. If you do not have a beginning, you do not have an end. Therefore, the journey, the Mahaprasthana starts today after taking these decisions. As you know, there's one chapter in the Mahabharata called the Mahaprasthana Parva, where Yudhishthira and the Pandavas go to heaven, followed by their dog. And this is how Mr. Narasimha Rao packaged economic reforms. Mahaprasthana was the best way to describe what happened in 1991. In English, you call it economic reforms, but it was actually a Mahaprasthana. It was a great journey, the beginning of a great journey. And in essence, Dr. Manmohan Singh provided the economic wisdom. But ultimately, economic wisdom does not get translated into action if it is not supported by political leadership. And that's what Mr. Narasimha Rao provided. So it was a combination of shrewd, almost Machiavellian, and I use the word Machiavellian in a good sense, not in the negative sense, shrewd, cunning, crafty, political management of the opposition parties and of his own party, and economic wisdom that combined to produce the Mahaprasthana of 1991. There was tremendous opposition to the finance minister within his own party. So the Prime Minister decided to call a parliamentary party meeting of about 350 members of parliament. And he said, whoever wants to speak can speak. This was his way of allowing people to let the steam off. 5 days the Congress Parliamentary Party met. And Mr. Narasimha Rao sat silently, allowed everybody to speak, and everybody but two people spoke in favor of the finance minister. One person was Manishankar Iyer, and the other one was a Rajasthan leader called Nathuram Mirza, very senior farmer leader called Nathuram Mirza. But the entire party was critical of what had been done as part of this Mahaprasthana. The Prime Minister allowed everybody to speak and then went and did precisely what he wanted to do. Now, let me draw some lessons, and I'll stop here. Let me draw some lessons from this book for contemporary times, because this is really a story of what happened in the past. It's a story as I saw it, as an aide of the Prime Minister, and as somebody who worked with him and the Finance Minister to get this program through. The first and most important lesson, really, is that there is no substitute for effective political management, for effective political outreach, for effective political communication, for effective political alliance building, if you want to get change through. If you want to get major change through our system, it's not enough to have the right ideas. It's more important to be able to sell the right ideas in a manner that is acceptable to different sections, to different interest groups. And this is what I think Mr. Narasimha Rao, with the support of Dr. Manmohan Singh, accomplished very, very skillfully in those first 33 days of his tenure. The second important lesson that one learns is that there is no substitute for institutional debate on change. If you look in the book, I have provided excerpts of parliamentary debates which are not in the public domain, unfortunately, till now. I hope they will come into the public domain shortly. But the debates that took place in Parliament, the criticism that both Mr. Rao and Dr. Singh took from VP Singh, Chandrasekhar, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, LK Advani, Yashwant Sinha, Jaswant Singh, Somnath Chatterjee, across the political spectrum. But the important thing is, institutional debate took place. Institutional give and take took place. And it is through the process of institutional debate, in which all political parties participated, that at the end, some sort of a consensus got built up that we have no alternative but to do what we are doing. There was no unanimity. There's a difference between unanimity and consensus. There was no unanimity. People were still sharply divided. But at the end of the debate, at the end of almost 26 days of debate, through much of July and much of August, all political parties said, okay, if we have to do it, let's do it now. If we have to use this crisis as an opportunity, let's do it now. So first is the importance of political management. Second is the importance of institutional debate. The third important lesson is that there is no substitute for a crisis for pushing through major economic reform. If you look at India's economic history over the last 60 years, whenever we have had a crisis, we have responded magnificently. Whenever things have been going well, we have tended to follow Newton's law, continue in a state of inertia. You look back 50 years ago, how did the Green Revolution come in India? India had 3 consecutive years of monsoon failure. Lyndon Johnson refused to give us wheat because we had taken a stand on the Vietnam War, which was not in support of the American position. And it was then that C. Subramaniam and M.S. Swaminathan took the historic decision of importing 18,000 tons of high-yielding variety of wheat from Mexico. And that was then the trigger for the Green Revolution. First wheat and then rice. So crisis was very important in the early 60s. Crisis was essential in 1991. I mean, there's a lot of retrospective coherence to this. By 96, everybody was talking that 1991 they always had in mind, they would have done. But the fact of the matter is that had the crisis not been there, we would not have been goaded into action in a matter of days. We may have done what we did in 33 days in 33 weeks. Or we may have taken 33 months. But we certainly won't have done in 33 days. So it's the crisis that concentrates the mind, and it's the crisis that brings out the major response that you want, which in normal circumstances would tend to taken for granted. In fact, what we did in 91 was not unknown, was being recommended since the mid 80s by a large number of people, both in India and abroad. But things were allowed to continue, things were allowed to slide till we had this crisis and till we had no option. So, very important, if you don't have a natural crisis, manufacture a crisis, because in that crisis lies the seed of major response from a system whose natural inclination is to inertia and lethargy, if not to anything else. So this is the third important lesson. The fourth important lesson is that it's not what you sell that counts very often, but who does the selling that counts. Mr. Narasimha Rao was seen to be the master of indecision. But in these 33 days, he proved to be the Jagat Guru of decision. I mean, there was not a day when he was not deciding. Here was a man whose whole political career, who's later described his political philosophy as not taking a decision, is also taking a decision. But in those 33 days, he proved himself wrong and proved to be remarkably decisive. Dr. Manmohan Singh, as I mentioned to you, was seen to be slightly left of center. He was not seen to be a market fundamentalist. He was not seen to be a market wala. Very important. So both the salesman, the chief salesman and the chief salesman's chief assistant, the prime minister and the finance minister, were unlikely salesmen. See, if you have a likely salesman, doesn't carry much credibility. But when you have a prime minister speaking a language which you don't expect him to speak, a finance minister who's speaking a language he is not expected to speak and he has never spoken, then even the worst critics come around. In fact, I remember in Parliament in 1991, it was not so much what the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister were saying, but the fact that these two gentlemen were saying it, that led to many people saying there must be something in what they are saying. Because they were men of unimpeachable integrity. Dr. Manmohan Singh particularly, Mr. Narasimha Rao, of course, had a long political career before him. But if Mr. Narasimha Rao was talking the language of liberalization and globalization, which he had never publicly articulated, even his worst critics, like the CPM and the BJP, were willing to give him the benefit of doubt. So it's not so much what is sold, but who does the selling, who does the saying, that counts very often in public life. And finally, the most important lesson is the manner in which this outreach and this extension took place. Both the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister not only spoke extensively, and I have given evidence of that, but more importantly, they listened even more extensively. Democracy and democratic institutions get built not by people who speak, but by also people who listen. And both these gentlemen had a remarkable capacity to listen. They listened to political leaders, they listened to trade unions, they listened to civil society organizations. In fact, there's a unusual photograph in this book, which I don't think this photograph can ever be replicated at any point of time. This is a photograph of housewives protesting outside the finance minister's office in North Block. Now they won't even get permission to enter that hill to go to North Block. But here this is a demonstration against the economic reforms by a group of housewives on the 9th of August 1991. They're ordinary people. This is a CPM organized demonstration. So it's the manner, it's the outreach, it's the reaching out to people, listening. That is what gives a feeling that they are being heard. You may not do what you're being told to do. You may end up doing whatever you wanted to do in the first place. But I think most people want the feeling that they are being heard. That most people want the psychological support that they are being listened to, particularly by people at the very top. And I think this is what the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister accomplished. Well, I end this book by a very famous quotation of a philosopher, a historian of ideas, Isaiah Berlin, who says that there are two types of people in public life. One is a fox, and the other one is a hedgehog. The fox knows many tricks. The fox is sly, it's quick, it's wise, it knows how to navigate, it knows how to save itself. And the hedgehog is prickly, it knows only one thing, and it sticks to one thing. Now, this Jugalbandi was a fox hedgehog Jugalbandi. Narasimha Rao was the fox. Dr. Manmohan Singh was the hedgehog. Dr. Manmohan Singh knew only one thing: economic reforms. Mr. Narasimha Rao knew many things. He knew how to negotiate with the BJP, how to negotiate with his own political colleagues, how to negotiate with the left, how to negotiate with the chief ministers. So this is the combination, the Jugalbandi, the fox hedgehog Jugalbandi, which created the circumstances for this transformational shift in India's economic policy. Let me end by saying that I think Mr. Narasimha Rao is a much misunderstood figure in Indian politics. But as I have described, he did many things to make himself misunderstood. He worked very hard to make himself misunderstood. I don't think that he has got adequate credit for many of the things that he did. Unfortunately, many of the things that happened during his tenure later on have clouded the judgment on his role as a major locomotive of change in the months of June, July, and August 1991. And that's really the focus of this book, is only those 3 months. I have not discussed his foreign policy, his policy in Punjab, J&K, and so on and so forth. That I'm sure others will do. But judged in terms of the economic transformation, I think Mr. Narasimha Rao was truly a magnificent figure of India's political history, who in 3 months' time was able to push through a program which people wanted to be pushed through, but which for some reason or the other kept getting postponed. Now one could argue, without the crisis, he couldn't have done what he did. But that's a judgment of history. Tolstoy, there's a Tolstoyan view of history which says individuals don't matter, events matter. I have some sympathy with that point of view, but I think individuals can also shape history. Individuals can also decisively influence the course of history. And I think in 1991, Mr. Narasimha Rao politically and Dr. Manmohan Singh, in terms of his economic background, certainly were able to use the events creatively to bring about this fundamental transformation, which in the last 25 years, if you see, nobody has really deviated from. Mr. Deve Gowda, Mr. Gujral, Mr. Bajpayee, then Dr. Manmohan Singh, and now Mr. Narendra Modi, all have basically gone on the same path that was identified and put in place in 1991. So to that extent, there has been a lot of continuity in the change that was brought about in 1991. And I think for that, both these gentlemen, both the finance minister, who unfortunately, whose role as finance minister has tended to take a back seat because of his tenure as prime minister, and certainly the role of the then prime minister, whose contributions have tended to get clouded because of many other events that took place, particularly insofar as the demolition of the Babri Masjid is concerned, I think that should not allow us to minimize the magnitude of their contributions to the evolution of contemporary India, as India is the world's third largest economy, the fastest growing economy, and certainly an economy with dynamic economic potential. Thank you.
That was a wonderful narration of what happened. Thank you very much. All of them are waiting for questions from you. So there you go.
I was looking if you would comment a little on, could you give insights on whether the objectives of why the reforms were pushed, were they objectives fulfilled through these 25 years? Talking from the grassroots level, not what the market economists measure growth as.
Let's put it this way. Mr. Seshan, the Chief Election Commissioner, once described economic reforms as LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization. So if you take this LPG framework, liberalization certainly has created a whole new economic environment, has led to an acceleration of economic growth, which has led to a reduction in the number of people living below the poverty line, and is remarkable burst of entrepreneurship in the country. Globalization has certainly worked to India's benefit. India's share of international trade has gone up. Exports create jobs, it creates employment opportunities, it creates new avenues for Indian businesses. Privatization still remains a very emotive political issue. So of the three things that we started off with in 1991, the new economic policy, the new fiscal policy, the new trade policy, and the new industrial policy, I would say the objectives of the new industrial policy, 9 out of 10. The objectives of the new trade policy, 9 out of 10. The objectives of the new fiscal policy, maybe 4 out of 10. We have a very distinguished former governor of the Reserve Bank sitting at the back who has written extensively on this. But many of the debates that took place in 91 are still taking place. The role of subsidies, how do we reorient expenditure from subsidies to investment, how do you ensure that subsidies reach the people they are intended to, what is the appropriate mix of public and private in the delivery of essential services like education, health, and so on and so forth. That debate is still taking place. So it's a mixed answer. On trade and industry, we have been very successful. On the fiscal side, I think we have been less successful, but it's not surprising because fiscal policy is all about politics. There's less politics in industry and trade. That's fairly technocratic. But in fiscal policy, it's a policy of political entitlements. And I think that has been 1 step forward, 2 steps backward.
Good evening, sir. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Ajay Gandhi and Manthan for providing this opportunity to meet you, as you are our role model. So it's an opportunity I've created to, I have a couple of questions, sir. First thing, I was born in 1989, so I introduced myself as a LPG kid. So I don't know what happened before 1990s. So I just know what has happened after 1990s. So going back to history, don't you think we have compromised on our values? For example, we have opened up, LPG has been occurred 25 years, and like for example, many fiscal stimulus of USA will change your financial situations in the country, like devaluation in China, collapse of the stock exchange, like sanctions on Iran and Iraq. So it's a very problematic for us. So don't you think we have compromised on our values? So as what before 1990s, and what are the major key policy roles has been initiated to tackle these problems? And my second question,
one of the things that I want to mention, since you were born after 91, is I don't think you should condemn the pre-1991 period. You know, I am not one of those who believe that whatever we did before 91 was wrong and suddenly we had nirvana in 1991. I don't subscribe to that view, and I've described this in the book. A lot of the success after 91 was because of the foundations that were laid in the pre-91 period, you know. And a lot of that got translated into the economic success that was manifested itself later. We became very rigid. We were not able to change our policy flexibly. We did not change in time. And I don't think we should also run away from the fact that many of the policies we adopted in the 50s had relevance insofar as the 50s were concerned. But the essence of policy is to respond quickly to changing circumstances. And somewhere in the 60s and 70s, we became rigid for a number of reasons. And we were not able to respond and change our economic policy to take advantage of numerous opportunities. So in fact, Mr. Narasimha Rao also, in the book I have mentioned, and Dr. Manmohan Singh as well, but Mr. Narasimha Rao particularly, was at pains to point out that change with continuity is our issue. In fact, there's a whole chapter on how the new industrial policy became a reality, and I'll just take one minute to explain. The first draft of the new industrial policy, which was a demolition of the entire MRTP, FERA, industrial licensing, went to the cabinet, and the cabinet rejected it and said, no, this is a rejection of all that we have done for the last 50 years. This is we are the party of Pandit Nehru, and we cannot subscribe to this. So Mr. Narasimha Rao was, a bit taken aback by this, and what to do? First-rate crisis on our hands. He had already announced that industrial policy reforms were coming, and the cabinet had turned it down. So I have described this, what happened, but in essence what happened was that 2 days later, the same industrial policy package goes back to the cabinet with a 4-page preamble, saying that in 48 we did this, 52 we did this, 56 we did this, 60 we did this, 68 we did this, 74, 77, 80, 84, 89, and then 91. And the last line said, our policy therefore is changed with continuity. So the same cabinet which had rejected the industrial policy on the 19th of July 1991 accepted and passed the policy unanimously on the 22nd of July. Now, what is the lesson you learn? The lesson you learn is marketing and packaging is very important. The product may be very good, but if you don't market it and you package it properly, particularly in the political context, it's not going to sell. So the industrial policy, the content didn't change, but the context changed, how it came about. So I think it's important to recognize that there is a lot of continuity in what we have done. However, circumstances change, new challenges emerge. And as an economy opens up, as an economy globalizes, as we integrate more and more into the world system, new opportunities arise, but new threats also come, new risks we face. And that's, I think, the hallmark of a good policy always is how quickly you're able to identify and anticipate some of these challenges and risks, and how you're able to translate your intentions into policy. See, it's not enough to have the right intentions. It's more important to be able to sell these intentions politically, because ultimately we live in an intensely political system. I mean, an open political system. We are not living in a Stalinist system, So we are living in a system where political consensus is absolutely essential. So for that, I think the overriding lesson of 91 is that there is really no substitute for political engagement, for political compromise, for political give and take, in order for you to create a larger constituency for change.
Before Suhim asks, his wonderful book is up there for sale. Most of you would want to buy it and get it autographed by him. After this question answer session, he would sit and autograph every book, I'm sure. So feel free to do that. And before the next question comes, let me tell you, friends, that on the 20th, that is on Tuesday, we have yet another evening talk on cyber security and espionage by Dr. Adam Siegel from America. This event is in partnership with the US Consulate General of Hyderabad, and it is at Saptaparni. So do come, a very interesting subject on which we should spend time learning and debating. So this is on Tuesday.
You said Manmohan Singh in 1991 was driven a lot more by compulsion. Can you hear me? Was driven a lot more by compulsion than conviction, and was indecisive by nature. Does that explain his lack of performance during his last 4 years in power, when he lapsed into grave indecisiveness, or was he just too busy listening with little time to act? Or did he not have
You got me completely wrong. Narasimha Rao came to reforms out of compulsion.
Right.
Manmohan Singh came to reforms out of conviction.
Okay, I stand correct.
It's just the other way around. Narasimha Rao came out of compulsion, but that compulsion gave way to conviction as the success of the reforms unfolded itself sooner rather than later. But Manmohan Singh came to it out of conviction.
What kind of seeds these 91 reforms has sowed, put in perspective with environment and sustainable development?
Well, you know, there are many things. 91 was a Mahaprasthana, but it was not a multi-directional Mahaprasthana. It was a unidirectional Mahaprasthana in order to repair the financial damage, in order to get the economic growth moving. And many of the issues that are relevant today that we are talking about perhaps were not part of the original design of reforms. But the Mahaprasthana also creates challenges as we go along, you know. New opportunities, new risks, as you mentioned, environmental risk of the fast economic growth, the more use of coal, the extraction of groundwater. So it's not the fact that we are not doing this adequately is no reason for you to condemn the economic reforms. I think the problem we often face in our intellectual discourse is that we ascribe to the 91 reforms all the ills that we see today around us, whether it's pollution, economic reforms, you know, if it is deforestation, it's faster. We need faster economic growth, which was the objective of the reforms. We need financial resilience, which was one of the objectives of the 91 reforms. You know, we have $352 billion of foreign exchange reserves today. We had less than $900 million on the 21st of June 1991. So I think there were certain core issues that had to be addressed by the economic reforms, but there were other issues that have to be dealt with, which may not have got the same degree of attention that they deserve, because we have not yet reached a crisis situation. You know, when everybody in India starts coughing badly and all of us become asthma patients, we will then do something about diesel cars. We will then do something about air pollution. You know, so it's that when things reach a critical and visible mass, then governments begin to respond. And that's unfortunately one of the Amartya Sen has written that the difference between India and China is that in a democracy, famine is never tolerated, but malnutrition is tolerated. Because malnutrition is a slow, daily event, you know, people are stunted, low body weight. But famine means then you will have 100 NGOs, 100 sign-ups, landing up, you know, and writing headlines, TV news. Sorry, Shanta, you know, there are so many NGOs. Everybody will land up and saying, "What is the government doing? There's a famine here." So you don't have famine in India, but you have malnutrition in India. So that's the point that he makes: is democracies are not good at dealing with incremental processes, but democracies are great at dealing with big bang processes like famine or pollution, for that matter.
Yeah, you mentioned change continuity, and another change with continuity was one of the things that you mentioned. Another kind of slogan that was heard very often during those days was reforms with a human face. So was it just a clever marketing strategy, or was there conviction behind it? And could you give us a couple of examples where, for example, the IMF prescribed something which the government did not follow because it believed in reforms with
Yes,
a human
very
face?
much. Very important. In fact, there's a whole chapter on this. In my own experience, in the draft that I had submitted to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister, exit policy was an essential element of industrial policy reforms. The ability of companies to exit easily, to declare bankruptcy easily, to adjust the labor force, flexibly. That was completely rejected by the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister. Completely. 100% rejected. And I've described that. That this is one element of quote unquote neoliberal reforms. I was supposed to be the great champion of neoliberalism in those days. The one element of neoliberal reforms that was not accepted. Reforms, adjustment with the human face, reforms with the human face, these were phrases that were used. In fact, in the 24th of July budget speech, Dr. Manmohan Singh uses these phrases. And the idea was that on account of these reforms, we will be able to invest more in education. We'll be able to invest more in health. We'll be able to invest more in, invest social capital. I would say, if you ask me, have we succeeded? I would say that we have partially succeeded. Education certainly has seen a very substantial increase in public investment, but where we have not succeeded is in public health. We have not had the step up in public investment in health that should have been there, commensurate with the morbidity and mortality situation as far as our country is concerned. So reforms with a human face was a marketing strategy, no doubt, but there was also an underlying principle that what the reforms will do is to shift the structure of public expenditure towards the social sectors. And as I said, that has happened partially. It's not happened completely. It's happened in some states. It's happened in the South Indian states. It's not happened in the North Indian states. So it's a mixed picture. The human face picture is a mixed picture.
Sir, fantastic speech. I want to bring your attention to the statement where you made all the successive Narasimha Rao governments continued the reforms what Narasimha Rao did. If you look at the current state of the economy, right, isn't it like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer? So do we need like another 1991 kind of course correction in the present state to fix this kind of situation?
Well, first of all, I think it's not entirely true to say that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That's not entirely true. If you were to look at it at the level of the states, the rich states are getting poorer and the poor states are getting richer. Punjab and Haryana have got poorer, but Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh have got richer. If you look at it in terms of people, which ultimately we should be looking at, because ultimately we're talking about people here, fact is that 140 million people, however you measure it, have crossed the poverty line over the last decade. Now, I'm not getting into a debate on what is the best way of measuring a poverty. But however, whatever the method, the same method 10 years ago and the same method now yields 140 million people having crossed the poverty line. So it's not entirely true to say that the poor have become poorer or the rich have become richer. Poverty has certainly gone down in the last 25 years, but inequality certainly has gone up. And inequality not just measured in terms of consumption, but in terms of health outcomes, in terms of educational outcomes, in terms of, those health inequality certainly has gone up. I can tell you that. Hyderabad is the tertiary health capital of the world, but there are districts around Hyderabad which have abysmal, appalling public health infrastructure. So that inequality has gone up. Now, what do you do about this inequality is something that, we need to bring inequality into the mainstream of the political discourse. And to give you an example, we are the only major economy in the world not to have an inheritance tax. Just to give you an example. Moment you talk about an inheritance tax now, it will be seen as Sensex will go down 10,000 points. So nobody talks about an inheritance tax. But the fact of the matter is that we are the only major economy, and certainly an economy that is generating wealth at an astoundingly rapid rate, we don't have an inheritance tax. So I think inequality must be part of our political discourse. But poverty has been a part of our political discourse. Inequality has not.
What was your backup plan? Suppose the reform process was not, you were not been able to pull it out of the parliament. Did you have a backup plan? And
There was no plan B. There was no plan B because this was the only plan. Mr. Chidambaram, when he was Commerce Minister, on the 4th of July, unveiled the trade policy, and I've quoted him extensively, where he said that in 5 years' time, we will achieve partial convertibility on the trade account. Actually, that was achieved in 2 years' time. Within 2 years, the economy had turned around. And the reason why it turned around was because of the infrastructure that had got built in the pre-1991 period. In fact, I remember in 93, the IMF saying that, Mexico is a great success story of the IMF because it had 2.5% GDP growth. And, I jokingly mentioned to my friend in the IMF that the best year of Mexico corresponds almost to the worst year of India. Because by 93, 94, India had come on to a 6%, 7% growth trajectory. So the speed of recovery, I think, astounded many people. Dr. Manmohan Singh himself in 91 said it will take 3 years. Mr. Narasimha Rao himself said it will take 3 years. But frankly, if you ask me, nobody knew. I mean, we can all say, in retrospect, we can all appear wise. But the fact of the matter is, if the economy had not turned around, and if the economy had not posted the growth rates it posted in 94, 95, and 96, I don't think that we had a plan B, frankly.
did IMF learn any lessons from this?
Sorry?
Did IMF learn any lessons from this?
Local ownership is very important. Local ownership is very important, and you don't push a one-size-fit-all formula. I don't know whether it learned on it, because IMF usually has one formula which it applies a cookie-cutter approach to all the economies. But in India, we tend to demonize the IMF and the World Bank. But the fact is that in the case of India, it's leaning on an open door. What Indians have contributed to the thinking of the World Bank and the IMF as much as the other way around, and many left-oriented economists have been pillars of the IMF establishment, So it's not true to say that the IMF puts pressure. I have reproduced a press release on May 21st, 1991, when Mr. Gandhi was assassinated. It has never happened before, that the president of the World Bank and the managing director of the IMF issue a joint press release on the death of a former prime minister. Okay? And the long press release which I have quoted, which says that, we support India at this time of crisis, we will continue to work with India. And so therefore the relationship with the IMF was not adversarial. I wouldn't say it was adversarial, because the IMF also knew that, what was possible and what was not possible in the Indian context. And many of the things that got done, Indians themselves were saying. It was already on the economic agenda, going back to the early 80s and L.K. Jha, when he first started working and writing on economic reforms.
I'll ask a question, please. You talked so effectively about marketing, packaging, and selling reforms. Has it happened effectively over 25 years? Even today, the public narrative is not entirely in favor of LPG. It is not, reforms still stall, they don't come about, there is reluctance to do it.
No, what is important is there's been no U-turn.
True enough, but then we've still not been able to push
Nobody has gone back to protectionism. Nobody has gone back to licensing. Nobody has gone back to, state control. Nobody has done a U-turn. Deve Gowda didn't do a U-turn. Gujarat didn't do a U-turn. Mr. Vajpayee didn't do a U-turn. Mr. Modi has not done a U-turn. So what started off in 91, In fact, there is a beautiful quote of Mr. Narasimha Rao who said that he said that the essence of doing a successful U-turn is to make it appear that it is not a U-turn. You know, and if you do that, then you are successful in doing a U-turn. You know, so don't sell it as a U-turn, don't market it as a U-turn, but you do the U-turn, right? So there's been no U-turns after 25. Reforms have moved, but remember, you're getting into the difficult areas of reforms. You're getting into the areas of reforms on which there are deep political differences. I mean, take bank denationalization. I mean, there are differences. I mean, the Congress party will never agree to denationalization of banks. Never. I can't see the Congress party ever agreeing to it. I can't see left parties, I can't see the Congress party agreeing to, or even major segments of the BJP agreeing to hire and fire. So, you know, you're now getting, in many ways, you could argue that 91 reforms was low-hanging fruit. And after 91, you're getting into the tougher areas of reforms, which have meant political, debates have become much more sharper. But that's where political leadership, counts. This is where, you need political leadership, and that political leadership means the ability to create a larger constituency for change.
Yeah. I beg to differ with you when you said Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao, out of compulsion and not conviction, did the reforms in 91. Because he was an erudite scholar and an able administrator with vast experience both in the state and the center. And in the state, I shall give one example. When he was the chief minister, he implemented the land reforms. As a result, the big landlords revolted and the Jai Andhra agitation, and he had to resign. But he was always a man of conviction. I beg to differ with you on that. And secondly, this is regarding the UPA 1 and UPA 2, if I may ask that question. The sugar industry has not been reformed, and there are so many controls on it, and UPA 1 and UPA 2, by banning sugar exports, controlling the release of sugar, and so many other controls, and even disregarding the Supreme Court judgment in the Mahalakshmi Sugar Mills case in 2008, and bringing in the ordinance in 2009, changing the Essential Commodities Act, and fair and remunerative price, it is neither fair nor remunerative. All these measures of UPA 1 and 2 have destroyed the sugar industry. It's in a bad state now. We are fighting to save the Nizamabad Cooperative Sugar Factory, which is closed for the last 7 years. None of the Congress leaders, either at the state or the center. I even had appealed to Mr. Rahul Gandhi four times.
I think it's going on for longer than...
Okay.
Please.
You have destroyed the sugar industry.
Please take it.
Please comment on that.
Yeah, sugar industry still retains a lot of controls. Some industries still remain under the ambit of controls, and the sugar industry certainly is one. And the economics of the sugar industry is controlled by the politics of it. The politics of it in Maharashtra, the politics of it in UP, particularly the two big states. And I don't disagree with you that over the last 2 decades, there has been half-hearted reform in the sugar sector, and the type of reform that other industries have seen has not been visible in the sugar industry. As far as your first question is concerned, no, undoubtedly, Mr. Narasimha Rao was a man of conviction, and I mentioned his work on land reforms for which he paid the price. But I've also given examples of his indecision when it came to the economic reforms of the type that he carried out in 1991. So it's not, what I meant to say for compulsion was the urgency, the sense of urgency that got demonstrated in the first 33 days was clearly because of the compulsion to avoid a default. It's not a bad thing. The word compulsion is not a bad thing. The word compulsion is because you had the imminent prospect of a default, and certainly he didn't want to preside over a default. He didn't want to go down in history as a prime minister who presided over a first-time default. So that is what I meant by saying that he came to it out of compulsion. But by February of 1992, he started actually, talking as if he believed in it and started giving a lot of conviction to what he said. But in the first 33 days, certainly it was this imminent, the Damocles sword of bankruptcy and default that forced him to take the measures. I mean, I've given an example of how first he agreed to two-step devaluation. The first devaluation got done on the 1st of July of 1991, and he tried to stop the second devaluation after having agreed on the 3rd of July 1991, and thank God for the institutional autonomy of the RBI that the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India had already announced the devaluation by then. So these things, these are part of our economic history. So I don't mean any disrespect to Mr. Rao when I said that he came to the 91 reforms out of compulsion.
Sir, we have grown in population, we have quadrupled in population since 1947. Our emphasis and focus seems to be on economic growth and reform and so on, but we are not addressing the issue of the growth in population. Where is the law? Where are the resources to take care of the entire population? Where is the law which says not more than 2 children per family? Now, in 1947, if we had said 2 children per family, it would have been okay. Now, even 2 children per family is a luxury. It can be only 1 child per family. Where is the law?
I think 1 child per family would be disastrous.
Okay.
I'm an only
at
child,
least
though.
2 children per family. Where
I
is the
can
law?
speak from experience. I'm an only child. I think, and China is now facing the economic and psychological consequences of having a 1-child norm. And I don't think, these are very simple, pat solutions. 1-child norm, 2-child norm. In many ways, the quadrupling of our population has been because of a dramatic decline in our death rates, which is a very good thing, that we have been able to increase longevity, we've been able to reduce infant mortality, not as fast as we should have, but certainly we have done much better than what we used to do 60 years ago. So fact is our population has quadrupled. We are going to add 400 million people in the next 35 years. Our population may be stabilize itself at 1.7 billion by the year 2050. We have to find the resources. 50 years ago, India was written off as a basket case because we would not find enough food to feed a nation of 1 billion people. Today, we are the world's 2nd largest exporter of rice and wheat. So it is possible to do it, but for God's sake, let's not get into a situation where we impose compulsion and coercion on human behavior and say you will have only 1 child or you will have only 2 children. I think that the consequences of that we have seen in our own country, what happened between 1975 and 1977.
Yeah, you spoke very eloquently about economic policy on the fly, so to say, day-to-day changes. But of course, there's this famous quote from Keynes, which is well known about the impact of ideas on policy. So I just wanted to ask you about that. These kinds of liberal ideas had been floating around, like Masani, Rajaji, Professor B.R. Shenoy, and I was wondering whether it had any impact on the thinkers, kind of behind the scenes in formulating current policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, one can, B.R. Shenoy, Rajaji, Charan Singh, many of these people had been talking about it. Jagdish Bhagwati had been writing about it. Many economists used to have written about it in the 70s and 80s. That's why when I mentioned to you that the reforms of 1991 was not a black box. There was a certain history, and I have, in the first chapter, I have traced that history. What happened, particularly from the mid-70s onwards, when Morarji Desai was the Prime Minister, the Dagli Committee on Controls and Subsidies, the Jha Commission on Economic Reforms, the Narsimham Committee on movement from physical control to fiscal control. So there was a long history of reforms in our country, of reform blueprints in our country. And therefore what happened in 91, was not something completely radically new. I mean, these were all people who were there in the public discourse. I.G. Patel was Mr. Narasimha Rao's first choice as finance minister. He was very much around. Mr. Narasimham, very distinguished citizen of Hyderabad, was very much there. So all these people, P. N. Dhar was another person who played a very important role in creating a larger public constituency for reforms. So one of the advantages that Mr. Narasimha Rao had in 91 was the fact that many of these ideas had been discussed. And there's a chapter in the book which I discuss the role of K.N. Raj in the 91 reforms, because I remember when the government was faced with a lot of criticism, K.N. Raj came out with an interview in Frontline magazine. Now Frontline, as you know, is an extreme left of center magazine, and they were very critical of the economic reforms. And K.N. Raj, generally a very distinguished voice, very man of great credibility, not seen to be a pro-market, pro-globalization, pro-liberalization. And he gave an interview and he said that, look, if Manmohan Singh is saying it, I believe him. That's what K.N. Raj said in the interview. That if Manmohan Singh is saying this, then there must be some truth to it and credibility to it. And I showed that interview to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister said, make sure that every congressman reads this. Because, K.N. Raj saying this is a very important thing. So that's what I meant by saying that there is a, it was not something that came out of the blue. The IMF was not imposing something that was alien to us. It was already part of our public discourse. And while certainly I can tell you that we didn't reread Rajaji before the 21st of June 1991, but certainly there was a certain history to what happened. I agree with you.
Hello, sir. I have a small doubt. Whenever there are discussions about the IMF or the Washington Consensus, there is always a criticism that public enterprises are forcibly hived off, as in, even though they're profitable or they're very critical for the state. So could you kindly tell us if there were any instances where you had, as in the government of the day, had opposed such, forcible disinvestment or something thrust upon them, and subsequently it turned out to be a good decision?
See, I can tell you in 91, neither Mr. Narasimha Rao, nor Dr. Manmohan Singh, nor I, nor Mr. A.N. Verma, nor 4 or 5 other people associated with these reforms were talking about Washington Consensus and all. These are all, this came into vogue much later. Okay, these are things, simple things that had to be done. Yeah, your economy is not collapsing because you're not exporting enough. You need to export more. Your economy is being strangulated because of licensing. You need to de-license. Your economy is being strangulated because you're not investing enough and all your money is going into consumption. You're borrowing for consumption. You need to change it. So, in many ways, what happened in 91 was common sense. Nothing to do with Washington Consensus and all. These are names that came later. Now, this issue that you have raised continues to be a very important political issue. What is the role of a public sector in a completely different environment? What is the mix between market and public? These are very important issues, and within each political party, there is a huge debate. And I was in the book I have explained. I myself was not able to sell to my prime minister and a finance minister a more aggressive policy on privatization. I did not have an ideological fixation on privatization, by the way. I am not an ideological believer in privatization. I just came to the conclusion that we're incapable of managing public systems. Our political establishment and our bureaucratic establishment will never allow true commercial autonomy for public sector enterprises. Never. They will not allow. And so I came to privatization out of sheer pragmatic consideration. But it remains a big issue today. It still remains a very big issue. So in many ways, we have bucked the Washington Consensus. We have not gone with the Washington Consensus when it comes to public, goods and public services.
I don't agree with you that enough debate took place. Political level, maybe debate would have taken place. I think the debate should have been very broad, somewhat longer, at least after coming out of the compulsive situations. For example, somebody was speaking about values. What happens to the reserved category? Reserved categories, reserved sections, particularly SCs and STs who are the net losers in the privatization program. I think this should have been debated when privatization was introduced. I think the same thing, the net losers.
My friend, wait on.
Kindly,
Wait
I will
on.
complete.
Your question is completely misplaced. There has been no privatization in India. There has been no privatization, hardly any privatization. And one of the reasons is because of the fear, what happens to reservations when you privatize? Precisely the point that you are raising. So it's not true to say that India has aggressively privatized and reservations have taken a back seat. This has not happened in India.
Factories were sold. You are saying I don't agree with you.
His point is very few.
And in that, I think, more than the earlier government, the Bajpayee government created an investment ministry and then continuously sold. What do you mean by that?
Only 3 companies out of 248 companies have been privatized. Balco, BSNL and Modern Food.
And only
3 companies have been privatized.
Many have been closed. What do you do about that? The next thing you said, industrial policy. Of course, good industrial policy, whatever, that would happen, but good agrarian policy did not come out. You see now, Atul Koil has spoken about, inequalities and which you are also referred to. But why the pathetic situation of the farmers? Workers have not died, but many farmers have died, because of the entrepreneurship and because of taking initiative they are dying. Not agricultural workers, but other workers, but farmers are dying. This has to be explained.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much. My question is that, we have 25 years down the line from 1991. From your point of view, which is the next best reform, the most important economic reform that we must do in order to progress?
I'm in the opposition.
Well, but in your view.
I think the most important area that needs to be reformed in India, in my view, is public health. I think that's the single most important issue that's facing the country today. I think we are seeing a complete collapse of the health system. We are seeing extreme inequalities in the health system. On the one hand, we are promoting medical tourism, and on the other hand, we are seeing a complete destruction of basic infrastructure in many parts of the country. And if you were to ask me what is the most important, if there's one thing that needs to be crying out for attention, it's the public health system.
Sir, in spite of this remarkable achievement, ease of doing business, we have not gone that extra mile. So when can it happen? Do you have any?
Well, ease of doing business is it's certainly one objective. But if ease of doing business means doing away with all essential regulatory activities, then I am not a great supporter of that ease of doing business. For example, there are many who believe that environment is now becoming a constraint to ease of doing business. I don't happen to believe in this, frankly. So ease of doing business by all means. Make the rules transparent, make the rules clear, don't change them halfway. Certainly, and increasingly the action is shifting to the states. The states where the rules are more effective and more transparent are winning out in the investment game. So I think this is an ongoing process, but one has to be careful. One should not really allow ourselves to go from one end of the extreme to another, because there are certain essential safeguards that are occupational health, safety, environment, the issue that this gentleman raised, social inclusion. These are all important issues that cannot be ignored in the Indian context.
When this new economic policy has been announced regarding the mining sector, more than 100 foreign companies have entered India to enter into the mining sector. mainly for gold, diamond, and copper and many things. But till now, the implementation of the policies have not come to the ground, resulting most of the about more than 100 persons who entered India and established their offices in Delhi practically walked out. So there is a problem in making a policy and at the time of implementation.
I agree. The mining sector has been somewhat slow moving in terms, because the mining reforms, by the way, didn't come about in 1991. Mining reforms have come out much later. Yeah, and you know, there were many other issues. There are many other issues involved in mining: forests, you know, sharing of revenue with local communities, tribal rights. It's not a very simple. It's not a very simple thing that, you know, just give a mining lease and people will come and start mining. So it's proved to be much more difficult than has been the case. There's been major mining reforms, particularly the auction system that has been introduced last year. And I think maybe in the years to come, you will see much more intensive mining activity than has been the case so far.
Good evening, sir. I have a comment. Some of our Prime Ministers, Mr. Nehru, Indira, PV and Manmohan Singh, they were not just Prime Minister of a large nation, but were a world statesmen, and they contributed a lot to the world economy and for the peace also. And even Rajiv Gandhi was a world leader because the contribution he made for SARC, the contribution of Nehru for Third World, and the way Indira always challenged USA. She changed two private companies owned by foreign companies into a public sector. Today everybody is getting petrol from them, Bharat Petroleum and Hindustan Petroleum. And the most technocratical has been the Rajiv Gandhi. I see BHEL, I resigned that company. I see without his reform in technological upgradation in 1985, BHEL would have been in trouble, much more trouble. And he is the man for technological upgradation, whatever today the new people are using. And another thing is the PV and Manmohan Singh are highly educated PhDs and thinkers and doers. People should acknowledge that. During last 4 years of UPA has done many great reforms. People have not noticed and media has not made it. Some of the best program is Food Security Act and land reform, and you have Manrega. Manrega was hailed by the ILO. I want you to focus, say something about the major reforms in the last 4. They have taken place, but people have not understood them.
I think you should wait
made a
for
happy
my next
comment.
book.
He'll be a very happy man to hear that.
This one is only on 1991.
Sir, on this forum, we have heard a lot of intellectuals having, political life or politicians being intellectuals. I have a confusion, sir. The confusion is when you have a conflict as a politician and as a intellectual representing the public, when you have a conflict of economic interest and political interest, what prevails, sir? And when very often we have seen that political interest prevails. So what is that you think about the public whom you are representing?
See, I think you should not hold political interest in contempt. There's nothing wrong with promoting political interests. Okay, politics is all about mediating disagreements. Politics is about settling distributional questions in society. Politics is all about listening to different points of view and arriving at a course of action. So, this, unfortunately, in our country, the word politics, politicking is a bad word. Politics should not be a bad word. Political interests should not be a bad word, because political interests very often are the only way of giving voice to sections of society who will never get a voice. It's only through the political system. I mean, which system in India would give Mayawati voice except the political system? You tell me. So I think do not hold political interests in contempt. Economic interests are always part of an overall political system, overall social system. You cannot divorce what we do in economics from the type of political system that we have or the social system that we have. These comparisons that we make with China, for example, what is possible in China is not possible in India because our political system is different, our social system is different, and that's the way we are. So we have to take the politics of our country, the social structure of our country, and design an economic policy that is not in conflict with that. There's no point putting an economic policy which is completely alien to the political and social framework. You know, for example, the Chinese can afford to set up a hydel power plant, relocate 2 million people, and not be bothered about where those 2 million people have been relocated. Nobody knows what happened. The Three Gorges Dam. The Three Gorges Dam and the Narmada Dam were started at the same time. Narmada is yet to be fully completed. Three Gorges has already been completed. But 2 million people, nobody knows. Whereas in the case of Narmada, 50,000 tribals who have been who have to be relocated every day, there is a conflict on it, and that's our society, and that's our reality. We have to settle that issue through politics, and not through technocratic means. You know, I think it's very easy to fall into this trap of saying, I'm going to do only economics. Forget the politics. You know, single-minded pursuit of economics will lead you into a political dead end. So one has to be very, very sensitive to political realities. And I think that's, you will see, both Mr. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh start, particularly Mr. Narasimha Rao. Dr. Manmohan Singh may have been more of a one-track mind in terms of economics. But Mr. Narasimha Rao was always, there's a chapter in the book on August 19th, 1991, Gorbachev is overthrown in a coup. And Mr. Narasimha Rao then gives a statement, this is a lesson for all reformers. And suddenly, everybody gets very worried. Why did Mr. Narasimha Rao say this? He said, you know, this is a word of caution, that reforms must be according to the pace a society can absorb.
Are we not losing?
You serve dinner also?
Yeah. Yeah. Are we not losing control on ourselves?
Sorry?
Are we not losing control on ourselves? Especially when our decisions are out of compulsion and we are sailing the deep oceans just to save our souls, as in 1991 case. Much to worsen when the crises are manufactured. How and what are we doing to safeguard us?
No, I don't think we're losing control on ourselves. In fact, there's a speech which I have quoted in the book where Mr. Narasimha Rao says the reforms means giving up controls but not giving up control. You know, you give up controls which impede economic activity, but you keep control. The government is in control. After all, it's the government that decides on the pace of reforms. It's the government that decides whether banks should be privatized or not. It's the government that decides how much should be invested in education or health. So we're not losing control. On the contrary, the criticism in India is that there is still too much control with the government. That's the other extreme that people are criticizing. So I am not persuaded that we have lost complete control over ourselves. Last question. He's got the mic. He's got the mic. I'll listen to you. Don't worry.
Yeah, just real quickly. First of all, thanks for the talk. My first quick question. You mentioned many factors that led to the 1991 reforms, like the balance of payment crisis, the interest rates. What about Rajiv Gandhi's assassination? Conspiracy theorists would have us believe that that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And second, I read an article recently by Shashi Tharoor on India's internal barriers on passing the goods and service tax reform. So with that, will that be passed with the crisis only, or will it just fade in the background with the usual political bhagdor?
Well, there's no crisis today. So in a way, the fact that we don't have a crisis does not give a sense of urgency to many of the things that need to be done. The GST is a good example of what is not being done. Mr. Modi has not followed Mr. Narasimha Rao's model of 91 on GST. He has not listened to others, he has not consulted others, he has not reached out to others, he has not accommodated other points of view. In fact, if he were serious about GST, he would actually go back in time in 1991 and ask himself, how did Mr. Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh do what they did? Dr. Manmohan Singh as finance minister spoke to all opposition leaders. The current finance minister has not spoken to all opposition leaders. He speaks to them only through his blog and through Facebook. Now that's not a good way of doing political consensus. Political consensus is face to face. Blog and Facebook are all very well in getting media headlines. But if you want to get GST done, you have to bargain. The essence of a political system is bargaining. You do something, and then you ask, what is it that I get in return? That's what happened in 91. And you take people into confidence. You give them a sense that, this is what you have to do. So I think there is no harm in giving credit to others. So I think on GST, the lesson from 91 for GST is political leadership, political communication, political constituency building has been conspicuously missing. And that's why GST has run into this roadblock.
I think we'll close it with this. I know there are a few dozen more people waiting for this. Thank you so very much, Mr. Ramesh. That was an amazing talk, very well articulated. May I request Mr. T.L. Shankar to offer a small memento to Mr. Ramesh so he remembers he had come to Manthan and come back again. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for coming.